The ascendancy and dissolution of the Roman Empire, an empire without equal. In 117 CE, the Roman Empire stood as a colossus, its dominion stretching from the fog-shrouded hills of Caledonia to the sun-scorched deserts of Arabia, and from the rugged coasts of Lusitania to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Encompassing roughly 1/5 of the world's population, Rome wove together diverse peoples through conquest, infrastructure, and an ironclad system of governance. Under Emperor Trajan, the empire achieved its zenith, a territorial expanse unmatched by any Mediterranean power before it. Its legions, disciplined and relentless, enforced a Pax Romana that promised stability, if not always peace. Yet, beneath this veneer of invincibility, the seeds of fragility were sown. The empire's vastness, while a testament to its might, became its Achilles heel, stretching resources, communication, and loyalty to their breaking points. The burden of boundless borders, Rome's frontiers were a marvel and a burden. The Rhine and Danube rivers served as natural boundaries, demarcating what Romans saw as the edge of civilization. Beyond these lay restless tribes, Germanic warriors in the north, Parthian cavalry in the east, and later, the formidable Picenans. Defending these borders demanded an immense network of fortifications, garrisons, and legions, costing the treasury billions of sesterces annually. According to historical estimates, by the 2nd century, Rome maintained over 300,000 soldiers across its provinces, stationed in more than 400 forts. Supply chains, stretching thousands of miles, were vulnerable to disruption. A single raided caravan could starve a frontier outpost. Communication was equally precarious. A dispatch from Britannia to Syria might take 6 weeks to arrive, often rendering orders obsolete before they were received. This sprawling empire required constant vigilance. Legions were redeployed incessantly, leaving gaps in defenses as they marched to quell rebellions or repel invasions. Provincial governors, often isolated from Rome's central authority, wielded near-autonomous power, fostering ambitions that sometimes rivaled the emperor's. In Egypt, the granary of the empire, Alexandria's merchants prioritized trade with India and the Red Sea over loyalty to distant Rome. Similarly, regions like Hispania and North Africa operated as semi-independent entities, bound to Rome in name but driven by local interests. The empire's cultural mosaic encompassing Greeks, Gauls, Syrians, Berbers, and countless others further strained unity. Latin dominated official discourse, but local tongues and customs thrived, creating a patchwork of identities that resisted homogenization. The sinews of empire, roads, and their risks. To bind this sprawling dominion, Rome constructed an unparalleled network of roads over 80,000 miles, by some estimates paved with stone and cutting through forests, mountains, and marshes. These arteries facilitated the rapid movement of armies, goods, and information, but they also carried risks. Rebellions spread along the same routes as legions, and diseases like the Antonine Plague, 165 to 180 CE, likely smallpox, ravaged urban centers, connected by these thoroughfares. The plague, possibly originating in Mesopotamia, killed up to 10% of the empire's population, decimating tax bases and military recruitment. Cities like Rome, with populations nearing 1 million, became petri dishes for disease due to their density and reliance on imported grain. Each new conquest exacerbated the strain. Dacia's gold mines enriched the treasury but required new legions to hold. Arabia's annexation brought prestige but stretched resources further. Mesopotamia, briefly seized by Trajan, proved untenable, abandoned after his death in 117 CE. Every province added wealth but also obligations, more soldiers, more administrators, more taxes. The empire became a machine that consumed as much as it produced. Its growth a paradox of strength and vulnerability. The cracks began to show by the late 2nd century. The empire's fragility was undeniable. The Antonine Plague exposed Rome's vulnerability to nature, undermining the myth of its omnipotence. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, R 161 to 180 CE, spent his final years not in contemplation but in grueling campaigns along the Danube, battling Germanic tribes like the Marcomanni. His meditations, written amidst war, reflect a stoic resignation to the empire's mounting challenges. His death in 180 CE left the throne to Commodus, whose erratic rule marked the beginning of instability. The empire ceased expanding, its borders no longer advancing but contracting under the weight of internal and external pressures. Bureaucracy swelled to manage the empire's complexity, with thousands of officials overseeing tax collection, law enforcement, and public works. Taxation grew oppressive, particularly for provincial elites who funded wars they often saw as irrelevant. Loyalty eroded as governors and generals, stationed far from Rome, prioritized personal power over imperial unity. The empire's heart remained in Italy, but its pulse weakened as power shifted to the provinces, where commanders wielded authority that rivaled the emperor's. A citizenship diluted in 212 CE. Emperor Caracalla's Constitutio Antonina granted citizenship to nearly all free men within the empire, intended to unify and bolster tax revenue. This decree instead diluted the meaning of Roman identity. Once a coveted status tied to civic duty and privilege, citizenship became a bureaucratic formality, a tool for extracting wealth rather than fostering loyalty. The empire's cohesion frayed further as regional identities Syrian, Gallic, Thracian took precedence over Roman ones. The military, too, transformed. Italy's citizens, once the backbone of the legions, increasingly shunned service, deterred by the risks and costs of distant campaigns. By the 3rd century, generals relied on provincial recruits, Syrians, Thracians, even Germanic tribesmen who often pledged allegiance to their commanders rather than Rome. Latin ceased to be the universal language of the barracks, and tribal affiliations overshadowed Roman rank. The Praetorian Guard, once the emperor's elite protectors, became a rogue force, notoriously auctioning the throne in 193 CE2 Didius Julianus, who ruled for mere weeks before his assassination. This act symbolized a deeper rot. Loyalty had become transactional. The crisis of the 3rd century, the period from 235 to 284 CE, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, was less a crisis than a near collapse. Over 25 emperors rose and fell in 5 decades, most meeting violent ends: assassinated, betrayed, or killed in battle. The empire fractured geographically and politically. In the west, the Gallic Empire 262 to 74 CE emerged, encompassing Gaul, Britannia, and parts of Hispania. In the east, the Palmyrene Empire 267 to 272 CE, led by Queen Zenobia, claimed Syria, Egypt, and Arabia. Rome retained Italy, but its authority was hollow, its economy in tatters. Inflation spiraled as emperors debased the currency, minting bronze coins with a thin silver coating. By 270 CE, the denarius was nearly worthless, forcing a return to barter in many regions. Trade networks collapsed, and cities shrank as populations fled to rural estates. These latifundia, sprawling, self-sufficient estates, became micro-kingdoms where peasants traded freedom for protection. The urban middle class, once the empire's economic engine, vanished under crushing taxes and insecurity. Ruralization deepened as farmers abandoned fields plagued by raids and Religion, too, shifted. The old Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus lost relevance, their temples crumbling or repurposed. Eastern cults like those of Mithras, Isis, and Cybele gained followers, offering personal salvation over civic duty. Christianity, though persecuted, spread rapidly, its message of eternal life resonating in an empire where death seemed omnipresent. Persecutions under emperors like Decius R. 249 to 251 CE only fueled its growth, turning martyrs into symbols of resistance. A temporary reprieve, Emperor Aurelian R. 270-275 CE, briefly halted the decline, defeating the Gallic and Palmyrene empires and restoring nominal unity. His construction of the Aurelian walls around Rome in 271 CE, however, betrayed a grim reality. The Eternal City now required defenses. His assassination in 275 CE underscored the fragility of his achievements. Power remained a dangerous prize, claimed by force and lost by betrayal. By 284 CE, Diocletian ascended the throne, recognizing that one man could not govern so vast a realm. His solution, the Tetrarchy, divided power among 4 rulers to Senior Augusti and to Junior Caesars. He reformed the military, standardized taxes, and streamlined administration. But his insistence on divine status as Dominus Lord alienated many. The emperor was no longer Princeps' first citizen, but a remote autocrat, cloaked in ceremony and inaccessible to his subjects. Diocletian's abdication in 305 CE, the first voluntary retirement of an emperor, sparked civil war, unraveling his system. The shift eastward, Constantine the Great R. 306-337 CE, emerged from the chaos, reuniting the empire through military prowess and strategic vision. His conversion to Christianity and the Edict of Milan, 313 CE, legalized the faith, aligning Rome with a new spiritual force. In 330 CE, he founded Constantinople, a new capital strategically positioned on the Bosporus, closer to trade routes and Eastern wealth. The Western Empire, centered in Italy, became a secondary concern. Rome's ancient prestige persisted, but its political relevance waned. The Western Empire staggered on, its cities depopulating, its infrastructure decaying. The final fracture in 376 CE, the arrival of the Goths, fleeing the Huns, marked a turning point. Emperor Valens permitted their settlement in Thrace, hoping to bolster the army with new recruits. Corruption and mismanagement, however, turned allies into enemies. Starved and exploited, the Goths revolted, culminating in the Battle of Adrianople 378 CE, where 2/3 of the Roman army was annihilated and Valens perished. This defeat shattered Rome's aura of invincibility, proving that its legions could no longer subdue the tribes it sought to integrate. The empire increasingly relied on foederati, barbarian tribes granted land in exchange for military service. These groups, including Goths, Franks, and Alans, retained their own leaders and laws, eroding Roman cohesion. By the early 5th century, the legions were a shadow of their former selves. composed largely of non-Romans who fought for pay, not principle. Generals like Stilicho himself, half-Vandal, navigated a delicate balance between Roman and barbarian identities. His execution in 408 CE, followed by the massacre of his Gothic troops, pushed survivors into the arms of Alaric, a former Roman ally. In 410 CE, Alaric's Visigoths sacked Rome, the first such violation in 8 centuries. Though the city was not destroyed, the psychological blow was immense. St. Augustine, writing City of God, argued that Rome's fall was a spiritual reckoning, not merely a military one. The empire's western provinces unraveled. Britain was abandoned by 410 CE, its cities left to fend for themselves. In 406 CE, a coalition of Vandals, Suebi, and Alans crossed a frozen Rhine, ravaging Gaul and Hispania. By 455 CE, the Vandals, now entrenched in North Africa, sacked Rome again under Genseric, stripping it of wealth and prestige. The silent end by the 470s. The Western Roman Empire was a fiction. Emperors like Romulus Augustulus, a teenage figurehead, held no real power. In 476 CE, Odo Acer, a Germanic general, deposed him, ruling Italy as a client of the Eastern Emperor Zeno. There was no climactic battle, no final stand. The empire ended in silence, its institutions, Senate laws, coinage lingering as relics. Cities shrank into villages, roads crumbled, and trade dwindled to local barter. The latifundia system hardened into proto-feudalism, with peasants bound to lords for survival. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, endured, centered in Constantinople. It preserved Roman law, administration, and culture, but its Greek and Christian identity distanced it from the Latin West. By the 6th century, Emperor Justinian's reconquests briefly reclaimed Italy and North Africa, but the Gothic Wars 535 to 554 CE devastated the peninsula, leaving it vulnerable to the Lombard invasion of 568 CE. The West fragmented into barbarian kingdoms: Visigoths in Spain, Franks in Gaul, Ostrogoths in Italy, claiming Roman trappings but lacking its unity. The legacy of a lost empire. Rome's collapse was not an event but a process, a slow erosion of systems and confidence. Yet its legacy endured, embedded in the institutions that survived. The Catholic Church became the West's unifying force, with bishops assuming roles once held by governors. Monasteries preserved Latin texts, from Virgil to Augustine, while popes negotiated with kings, filling the vacuum left by emperors. Clovis, the Frankish king, converted to Christianity in 496 CE, aligning his realm with the Latin Church, a synthesis of barbarian might and Roman tradition. Roman roads, though neglected, shaped medieval trade routes. Latin evolved into Romance languages: French, Spanish, Italian, carrying the empire's linguistic DNA. Roman law, preserved in Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, influenced ecclesiastical and secular codes. Even architecture bore Rome's mark, with churches repurposing Roman bricks and columns. By the 8th century, the Carolingians under Charlemagne sought to revive Rome's glory. His coronation as Emperor of the Romans in 800 CE was a symbolic act, not a restoration. His empire, centered in Aachen, lacked Rome's urban infrastructure or centralized bureaucracy. It was a feudal patchwork, bound by personal loyalty, not imperial law. The Holy Roman Empire, formalized in 962 CE under Otto I, continued this fiction, invoking Rome's name while governing a decentralized realm of German and Italian territories. Rome's enduring echoes. Rome's fall was complete, but its influence was indelible. By the 12th century, Italian city-states like Venice and Florence revived urban life. Drawing on Roman civic ideals, the study of Roman law at Bologna's university laid the groundwork for legal systems that countered feudal chaos. The Renaissance, blossoming in the 14th century, saw scholars like Petrarch rediscover Roman texts, not as relics, but as living inspiration. Architects like Brunelleschi studied Roman structures, while artists like Michelangelo reimagined classical forms. Rome's legacy became a paradox, a civilization that had crumbled yet shaped the world. Its roads, though overgrown, guided pilgrims. Its language, though fractured, birthed new tongues. Its laws, though forgotten, informed new codes. The empire's fall was not an end but a transformation. Its fragments scattered across Europe, reassembled in churches, kingdoms, and the dreams of those who claimed its mantle. Rome had not died, it had dissolved into the soil of a new world, its roots nourishing the medieval age and beyond.